He's on the Senate Judiciary Committee. He just finished questioning the Inspector General today about his findings. Senator Coons, thanks for joining us. As always, we appreciate it. The Inspector General today said that no one should feel vindicated by this report. What was your big takeaway from his testimony today?
Well, Jake, first it was that the Inspector General conducted a strikingly broad investigation. They looked at 1 million documents, they conducted interviews of over 100 witnesses, and they ultimately concluded that the FBI did not act with political bias, that they launched an investigation into the possible collusion between Russian intelligence and the Trump campaign with a solid and legal foundation. They did identify some missteps, some inadequacies in FBI procedure and behavior, but overarching, the important conclusion the IG reached was that those actions did not influence either how that investigation was launched or the conclusions that it ultimately reached.
We live in a time of such division. There isn't even agreement within the leadership of this Justice Department on this. Take a listen to this exchange between the Inspector General and your colleague, Senator Klobuchar.
Do you agree with Attorney General Barr that the investigation was predicated on the thinnest of suspicions?
Well, I'm not going to get into a comparison on what his view. He's free to have his opinion. We have our finding, as I said earlier, I stand by our conclusion.
Presumably, from your first answer, you side with the Inspector General, Mr. Horowitz?
That's right. And one of the things I did emphasize was that I'm grateful that the FBI director, Chris Wray, instead of continuing to support the conspiracy theories advanced by President Trump and, frankly, by Attorney General Bill Barr, accepted the conclusions of the Inspector General's report, said he would promptly move to implement the recommendations for how to improve the FISA warrant process, and agreed with the conclusions that the Inspector General reached.
So the bar was, no pun intended, the bar for launching an FBI investigation, counterterrorism or intelligence, was lowered after 9/11. It sounds to me like you're saying that Attorney General Barr would not necessarily view the investigation as having been launched on the thinnest of suspicions if it had been an investigation of, say, your fellow Delawarean Joe Biden.
Well, I can't speak to what the Attorney General would say in that circumstance, but my broader concern is that there wasn't bipartisan agreement today in that hearing that the Inspector General reached the right result, and that result was that the FBI made its most important investigatory decisions without political bias. That runs directly in the face of President Trump's repeated attacks on the Mueller investigation, on the FBI, as being a hoax or witch hunt or politically biased. That's the important conclusion here, and I wish that all of us on the committee, Republican and Democrat, would have embraced that outcome today.
Now, you pressed Horowitz on whether the FISA application process was abused for political purposes. He did not say he saw evidence of it either way. Senator Graham, the chairman of the committee, seemed to suggest that the lawyer whose conduct is being referred for prosecution, who altered this email for a FISA reauthorization, that may have been acting out of bias based on anti-Trump text messages. So in other words, that the FBI investigation was launched okay, but that it wasn't continued in a non-biased way. What do you make of that?
Well, the larger point I was making in my questioning today, Jake, was that the individual, Carter Page, who's at issue here, there was a FISA warrant issued against him for surveillance on him. He ultimately was not the target of any of the indictments of this investigation. But if you put it in broader context, there were 37 indictments, convictions, guilty pleas. The president's theory that this was a baseless witch hunt, I think, is disproven by the fact that the president's own national security advisor, deputy national security advisor, campaign manager, personal attorney, all stand convicted. They've either pled guilty or been convicted in court as a result of this investigation. That's the larger backdrop. And while there was this one instance that was pointed to over and over by Chairman Graham and others on the committee today, if you put it in a broader context, this was a well-founded and necessary investigation.
Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware, thank you so much, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jake.
Now and then, how the five